I'm Senator Rod Grams, and welcome to the September edition of our Washington Report. The United States and Canada have always enjoyed an open and a very strong partnership. Our two nations share the longest undefended border in the world and enjoy the world's largest two-way trading relationship. Now, there's no doubt that Canada is truly our friend to the north. Unfortunately, a provision within the 1996 immigration law may put a hamper on that open trading relationship by restricting travel between our two nations. If this provision is not fixed, it will have an even bigger impact on the people of northern Minnesota by harming the area's tourism industry, commerce, and most importantly, the livelihoods of our residents. My guest on today's show understands the importance of this unique trade and cultural relationship shared by Canada and the United States, and he has worked with Congress to ensure continued free and open trade between our two countries. He is Canadian Ambassador to the United States, Raymond Chretien. Ambassador Chretien, thank you very much for taking your time and joining us today.
Senator, it's a great pleasure talking with you this morning.
We want to talk a number of issues, including trade and what the trade relationship means between the United States and Canada, our long history, the undefended borders that we talk about and brag about, I think, as being the longest undefended border in the world. But something has kind of put a little bit of a kind of a fly into the flower, or whatever you might say, into the ointment, and that is this Section 110 that would deal with new restrictions on border crossing. And maybe to talk a little bit about that and what it would mean to Canada, what it would mean to the United States, but maybe if you could explain first, what is Section 110 that we are concerned about?
Section 110, Senator, is part of the 1996 Immigration Act, and if it were to be implemented, if it is not amended before the end of September of this year, it would result in controls being imposed at the border for all non-U.S. residents. That means Canadians and U.S. permanent residents. So we would have a serious problem. It looks as if this control would take the form of 3 or 4 questions answered by each and every passenger in each car crossing the border. For instance, the questions might be the following. When were you born? Where were you born? Where are you going into the U.S. and how long are you going to stay? Just that, you can imagine, would take quite a lot of time, and we would clog up the border in a massive way. And by the way, it's not only Canadians who would suffer from this measure. Americans probably more so. There are far more Americans crossing the border than Canadians crossing our border. So we don't like it one bit. Senator Leahy last year on the floor of the Senate described this measure as a slap on our national face. It is just that. So we want to keep the border open, friendly, conducive to tourism, good trade, and certainly not a palisade between two great nations.
And when we talk about it would be more than just an inconvenience, I think there's been studies or reports done that said that the backup along the borders would be miles, 5 miles, 7 miles, 10 miles. And as you said, nobody is going to wait in line that long. So it would be some real problems for everything we've talked about, tourism, commercial trade, etc.
And thousands of businesses would be immediately affected. Imagine those that are dependent upon in-time delivery for their products. They cannot afford to have their products caught on some kind of bridge or at the border somewhere for 3, 4, 5 hours. Their products would be destroyed at the end of the trip. So we just want to help Congress understanding the multiplicity of ramifications of that measure. And I'm confident that by the end of September, the situation will remain as it is.
Now, as we mentioned, it was part of the 1996 immigration law. Now, the real intent of this law, I think, was aimed more toward to limit the flow of illegal immigration coming from Mexico. And although that it was kind of ambiguous, it was not spelled out definitely, and of course, the provision also then had to include the other borders of the United States, which was the U.S.-Canadian border. So it's we believe, an unintended type consequence, but sometimes once the language is there, it's hard to pull it out of the bill. And we're finding that it's not as easy as a lot of people thought it was going to be to remove it.
Yes, as for the intentions of that law, you have described them very accurately. I cannot comment upon the intentions of that provision, but I certainly can comment on the consequences and also on the totally different realities between our border compared to the U.S.-Mexico border. We don't have the same massive issues to deal with than do exist at the southern border, and we have to deal on this issue in a bilateral way. We cannot naftalize everything because NAFTA came into effect in '94, and this is clearly an issue for both of us to discuss bilaterally, to sit down and see how we can resolve the objectives that are the same on both sides of the border. Canadians and Americans don't like drug trafficking. We don't like terrorists crossing our border, but we're prepared to sit down with you in other fora and deal with those issues the right way.
The ones that would be most affected, of course, would be the border towns. I mean, the cities and the states closest to the Canadian border, so it would have a huge impact on the state of Minnesota and, of course, to the cities to the north in both Ontario and Manitoba for our consideration, but also along all the way to the East Coast.
You mentioned Ontario and Manitoba. Senator, in this town now, I think that people know that Canada is your largest trading partner. What they don't know is that the province of Ontario alone is your second largest trading partner in the world, ahead of Mexico in third place, and certainly ahead of Japan in fourth place. So you can imagine the problems between Minnesota and Ontario.
Right.
So people in your state would certainly suffer negative consequences from the coming into effect of that law.
And as you said, our businesses know it in Minnesota, as well as the country, how important Canadian business is, and that is the traffic that comes across both sides of the border going back and forth, and just doing business, anything from maybe grocery shopping or whatever it might be, vacations, tourism, etc. But it would really have a concentrated effect for Minnesota as well as other border states along the north.
Very much so. And also, we don't understand why such a measure is even contemplated. In the last 5 years, we have tried to open up the border. Remember the Open Skies Agreement of February '95. It has resulted in approximately 20 million additional people crossing the border. We're trying to do everything we can to make it easy to cross. And then suddenly, this measure pops up. That would go against everything we have tried to accomplish, against our shared border accord, against the experiments that we're trying to achieve now on various parts of the border, where people could cross the border with just a little plastic card, as opposed to just being asked questions by actual people. This measure goes against everything we've tried to do.
Now, earlier today we were talking, and I know you said it takes about 30% of your time right now working on this one issue, and it's that important. What are the people in Canada saying about this? They must be saying a lot if it's got your big attention.
People are upset because, first of all, a lot of people see this as some kind of visa requirement. It is not. We're not talking about the imposition of a visa here, but still, the fact that the very easy traffic now, if you're four retirees heading from Toronto to Florida or from Montreal to Florida now, car after car, they're just waved through. If you look reasonably honest, no questions asked. Now, each and every passenger would have to get out of the car, presumably, and fill a questionnaire and answer questions. And this is a massive change for tens of millions of people. And let me remind you that the border was crossed last year 200 million times. 200 million times. Minnesotans go to Ontario, some of them many times a day, and vice versa. So that's what we want to keep in place. No change. Status quo at the end of September. That's our objective.
Now, as you know, last year I, along with Senator Spence Abraham of Michigan, introduced legislation to try repeal Section 110, which we're talking about, of the 1996 immigration law. And just last week, the Senate passed the Commerce Justice State Funding Bill, which included a provision to strike 110. And, you know, we're going to continue in my office to work very closely with Senator Abraham to follow the progress the legislation is making, to make sure that it gets through the Congress totally, and hopefully signed by the President, as you said, before September 30th in one form or another. But what efforts are you making? I know you're talking a lot with the Canadians. What are you doing to help the debate that we're having going on here in Washington?
I'm talking with you today. I'm asking you to write all the members of the Minnesota delegation in the House to co-sponsor the Lafarge bill. I'm doing this with you today. I'm doing this with many of your colleagues day in and day out these days. I'm in close touch with Senator Abrams. We have been trying to coordinate our efforts. We have tried to get a massive campaign going on, including the Chamber of Commerce. I've lobbied your governors collectively, individually. Last week I was in Chicago meeting with the governors of the Great Lakes region. All of them have agreed to write a letter to Speaker Gingrich to say that this measure doesn't make sense. I've received all your governors at the embassy in February. I'm going to see them all this Sunday night and Monday in Milwaukee. So I'm trying to get the support of all the people who can understand what it would mean. And it has been, I must say, a fruitful exercise because your governors have been extremely helpful. And now a great number of corporations are probably writing you, writing other members of Congress, and certainly writing the Mr. Lamar Smith, of course, who is the main proponent of that measure in the House. I'm also in touch with him. I talk with him. We exchange views. We exchange letters. Many of them are made public. So it's a healthy dialogue, but it involves a lot of educational efforts because a lot of the Southern members of Congress have never been in my country, in our country. So I keep telling them, why don't you come and spend a week in Montreal or Quebec or Vancouver so that you will see how our border works. You know that, Senator. It's in the middle. This border is everywhere and nowhere. It's in the middle of lakes, rivers. Right. People down south think that there's a big wall up there or a couple of bridges leading to a fairyland called Canada. Yeah. It's very different. So I have to spend a lot of time telling them, listen, this is where we are. So this is part of my job.
And just to set the record, Lamar Smith, Congressman Lamar Smith is from Texas.
Yes.
And of course he has a much different view of this legislation dealing with the immigration and problems, but mainly facing Mexico. So he is coming from it from a different point of view.
Yeah.
But we don't want that to have the same type of ramifications or impose those same type of restrictions or bring those problems that are shared between our borders in Mexico and the U.S. With the friendly relationships that we have with our Canadian.
Yeah, and by the way, we share the objectives of Mr. Lamar Smith, by the way. I mean, they're perfectly good objectives. He wants to fight terrorism, drug trafficking, illegal migrations. We are for all those good things also, but in a different way. We want to work with them, with the U.S., in the proper fora to solve those issues.
And I just wanted to bring it up before we take a quick break here, but we've talked about how inconvenient it would be for the border states like Minnesota and Manitoba and the rest of Canada. But as a nation as a whole, when we talked a little bit earlier about the trade and how important trade is, and Canada is our largest trading partner. We do more trade between our borders than any place else in the world.
We are by far your largest trading partner, and it's increasing. Just the fact that one province of Canada is your second largest trading partner will be understood by Minnesotans. It's next to your border, so this is increasing since the FTA and NAFTA came into effect. Our trade has doubled, literally doubled, since the FTA came into effect. We like it that way. It's good for you and it's good for us. Millions of jobs on both sides of the border are created by this massive and more integrated trade.
Ambassador, we're going to take a break. We're going to be back and talk with some other issues dealing with maybe some trade, but some of the questions about fishing in the northwest angle of Minnesota as well. We'll be back and talk about that after this.
He protects all living things in the forest. But he can't do it alone. Please don't play with matches. Put out your campfires. And never ever forget the words of Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent forest fires.
And again, my special guest on this edition of our Washington Report is the Canadian Ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Raymond Chretien. And thank you very much again for taking time to be with us and join us on this program. We're talking a little bit about the trade, the border problems, Section 110, immigration and everything. But for Minnesota, it gets a little bit more close to home when we talk about the Northwest angle. And as you know, there was a recent bill introduced by Congressman Colin Peterson, helped to call for the cessation of the Northwest angle to Canada. I didn't know if Canada wanted to get involved with that, but maybe talk a little bit about the problem and what the problem is. It deals with where you stay, if it's on the Canadian side, the American side, whether you can take fish from one side to the other. And it's created a lot of problems. And, you know, it might be only small to, you know, the countries overall, but for those people it's very important.
Yes, if you will allow me first to say a few words about the perception of the whole issue. It's rare that a part of the U.S., your great country, talks about seceding to join us. Of course, would be happy to welcome any part of the U.S. into Canada, but it's unlikely to happen. But it underlines the difficulty of issues related to fisheries, and hopefully I'll be wrong, but water issues in the centuries to come. But to come back to this issue of fisheries, this has been going on for a number of years. The idea here is to try to conserve some species. There has been various meetings of the stakeholders on both sides of the issue, Ontario and Minnesota. I understand that there was some kind of understanding a couple of years ago for Minnesotans to catch fewer. It's called there are two species here:
walleye and sauger.
Walleye and sauger. They're difficult for me, but those two species are threatened, and we felt that Minnesotans should catch fewer on the Ontario side of the lake. This has not happened. The same amount of catches as remain. No restraint has been shown, and in those circumstances, the province of Ontario has changed its regulations in a way that is creating a problem for people who want, for instance, to use lodges or tourist homes on the Minnesota side of the lake. This is not an issue that you and I can resolve. It is really for the state of Minnesota and the province of Ontario to resolve. And I certainly I'm prepared to help in any way, shape, or form to bring about a new dialogue on this issue. Hopefully we can resolve it. But I'm glad that you're raising this issue. In fact, you mentioned fisheries, lakes. Let me mention water. Water between our two countries in the centuries to come will be also a difficult issue to manage. Our two countries are co-responsible for the management of 40% of the world's reserves of fresh water. You know that water in many parts of the world today is a very controversial issue, and this glass of Canadian water is already, if you buy it in a store, more expensive than the equivalent in gasoline. So you can imagine what issue it'll be for our descendants centuries down the road to manage not only fisheries or threatened species, but also the whole issue of water.
I was going to mention that because, you know, the situation we're talking about involves the disagreement between America and you know, Canada, Minnesota, and Ontario about that. But the larger questions that you're bringing up, talking about the regard to U.S. and Canadian treaty agreements, what can be done at the federal level to help reconcile these type of disagreements?
At the federal level, I would have to tell you that this is not the way things are going to go, in my view. Because of the great debate you have in the U.S. about devolution of authorities to states, we have a similar debate going on in Canada between our national government and the provincial government. So I suspect that in the years to come, more and more problems will have to be sorted out, discussed, resolved at the regional and local level. They will involve your governors, our premiers. By the way, they are already meeting. I have attended myself a couple of those meetings between governors and premiers. I think that more and more issues will have to be dealt with and solved at that level, because there will be, you know, there'll be fewer resources at the national levels likely, and states and provinces will have no choice but to solve those many issues. It's the way of the future, in my view.
Well, the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, was agreed to in 1994 in an effort to increase free trade between our two countries, Canada and the United States, along with Mexico. How has NAFTA really accomplished free trade? How has it been working?
It has worked for us. I mean, NAFTA has been a success story for us. I've been involved with this issue for a long, long time. I dealt with it when I was ambassador to Mexico in the middle 80s, and I remember leaving Mexico in '88 knowing that we would have a free trade agreement before the end of the century. Never expected it would be that quick. But so far, for us, so good. In Mexico, equally, it is perceived as a success story. It's very strange for me to see that the problem remains in the U.S. We never expected that the hub would remain a problem. We thought that both extremities, Mexico and Canada, would suffer more, perhaps, or would have greater difficulties in adjusting to this new trade reality. But strangely, no problem in Canada. We're pleased with it. No problem with Mexico. Still a big issue here. And by the way, we hope that you as a country, will be able to give yourselves the tools for further trade liberalization. We absolutely need this. We Canadians, we're totally dependent upon exports for our wealth. 40% of our GDP depends upon our exports. So we want to push the envelope further down. And we cannot wait forever. We have already negotiated our own free trade agreement with Chile, and we're on the point of signing one with the Mercosur countries. All of this is NAFTA compatible. We're waiting for you. We hope you'll be able to join us in this collective endeavor.
And when you say the tools, you mean a fast-track authority, and allow us to do that, because if we don't sign these agreements and do them quickly, as you have mentioned, not only will Canada work out their own agreements outside of that, but also the countries of the Mercosur, the South America countries, are going to sign pacts with Europe or Japan or Asia, and it's going to leave, we believe, many of us, the United States on the outside, knocking on the door to drag it in.
You've said it. You're dead on. Actually, the Mercosur countries are already trading more extensively with Europe than with the U.S., which is a very new development, and certainly not a positive one for you.
Because, like you said, they're not going to wait either. Their economies depend on trade, more and more every day.
That's why we're watching this issue very, very carefully. And for you, or for us, the sooner you get fast-track, the better it'll be for you and for all of us.
When we talk about NAFTA, you know, there's always going to be some disputes as trade agreements go into a place. How has the efforts been to resolve these disputes or differences through NAFTA? How's the process work?
It has worked well. The dispute settlement mechanism of NAFTA already have been put in use a number of times. We have won most of the panels, but not all of them. So the system works as it should. We're always happy to see a dispute heading in that direction. That's how it should be. So for us, we have no complaints about the way disputes are resolved under the NAFTA.
How do you respond to those who accuse the Canadian Wheat Board of unfair wheat pricing?
Same response. There's a perception in some parts of the certainly of the U.S., some parts of important parts of Congress, that the Wheat Board is somehow distorting the wheat market. We have agreed to subject the Wheat Board to a number of audits. We have been audited ad nauseum. There has been an audit by the ITC, a few by the GEO. There's one going on right now. We're confident that, again, the activities of the Wheat Board will be judged to be in total conformity with our trade obligations. The problem is simply that you like our wheat. I mean, there's a great demand for it. Our durum wheat is perhaps the best in the world. Your pasta producers love it. By the way, they use a lot of durum wheat, but they export back to Canada a lot of pasta. So all in all, it's good, in our view, for both countries. And we are importing from you quite a lot of wheat. Last year, 120,000 tons to Ontario. 1 million tons of corn go from the U.S. to Canada. So it's a trade in both directions. We're very pleased with this. That's what we call free trade.
Right. And then there's other questions dealing with poultry, dairy, timber, all to be resolved and worked out, though.
Yes, through, again, the proper channels. I mean, we have some disputes these days on the lumber issue. By the way, just to give you an idea of the importance of our trade, the lumber deal that we have between our two countries is the largest sectoral deal of the U.S. with any country of the world. So we've got a tiny set of disputes within this broad agreement, but it's being sorted out right now. I mean, we're challenged because of the lowering of the stumpage fees by the government of British Columbia. That's all right. We will see how it's going to go. We're challenging you on the issue of drill studs. We'll see how it's going to go. But again, due process is followed, and that's how it should be. Out of our massive trade of $1 billion and a bit more each and every day of the year, less than 1% of that trade is subject to trade action. It's almost nothing in a relationship of that magnitude. So we should be very proud of that accomplishment.
And I just hope that those who are affected most by it realize that there is a lot of work going on to try to resolve these disputes on both sides of the border, so that neither side is just accepting this but saying, let it take its course, let's do the audits, let's do the negotiations and try work out these problems.
Yeah, you're right. And remember, we're also doing this in a very special spirit. We're not just trading partners. Minnesotans live next door to Manitoba and Ontario. They're friends. They're intermarried. Their cousins are married to Canadians and vice versa. So we solve all those disputes in a spirit of friendship, almost as in the spirit of an extended family, which is a unique asset that we should all be proud of.
We're going to take another quick break. We have just a few moments left in our show, but we'll be back right after this.
Your approach is looking good, Cobra.
The men and women in the National Guard and Reserve face some tough challenges when they serve. Challenges that teach them discipline, leadership, and technical skills that make them better employees. So when they need time off to serve, don't make their toughest challenge approaching you.
My hero? Isaiah Thomas. Kevin Costner. Mr. Wong.
These are teachers, but to the kids they've reached, they're heroes.
My hero? Mrs. Wooten. If I don't get through to that child, who knows, maybe no one else will.
Teachers have the power to wake up young minds, to be heroes, to make a difference. Reach for that power. Teach. Find out how by calling 1-800-45-TEACH. Be a teacher. Be a hero.
And again, our special guest is Canadian Ambassador Chretien, and thank you very much for being here. I'm sorry we're just about out of time, but one quick comment. We're dealing a lot with the question of sanctions. We're talking about trade. How do sanctions work with trade relationships?
We are very worried. We don't like sanctions. Certainly sanctions. We don't like sanctions with unilateral extraterritoriality. We think that it's not the right way to solve problems. In our view, not only it doesn't work for the countries that you'd like to influence, but it affects the wrong people. Quite often, it's the people who take the brunt of those sanctions, and not necessarily the leadership of those countries that you want to affect. And if you're not careful, soon you'll have more than half the countries of the world subjected to unilateral American trade sanctions. It's not a way to make friends. You are very powerful, very big, but one day you'll need friends to fight the new battles of the centuries to come. And if you want to make friends, you have to remove those sanctions.
Yeah. That's a whole new program we need to talk about, but I hope we can have you back sometimes. But thank you for joining us today very much.
Senator, I want to thank you very sincerely for allowing me to talk to you and to talk to the people of Minnesota. I think that the overwhelming message that we should keep in mind, we have two great countries, and in the centuries to come, our two great countries will have to decide how to work more and more jointly to face the challenges of the new centuries.
Thanks so much. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back again with our new program next month. We'll see you then. Goodbye.